Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the React Native Show podcast. Before we start the episode about state management, let me quickly plug our newest free ultimate guide to React Native optimization, a comprehensive source of knowledge when it comes to improving the performance of your React Native application. We talk about the state management here on this podcast soon, and you can read how to make your state management fast in our guide. So make sure to check the guide after you listen to this show. And yeah, let's go on with the show. Hi, hello, and welcome to the next episode of our The React Native Show podcast, where we discuss the latest and greatest of React and React Native. And we chat with awesome guests like my today's guest, Ola Linczewska. A software engineer here. Thank you. Ola is a software engineer here at CallStack and an amazing writer who just wrote a book about state management, which gives me an awesome excuse to talk about state management in React and React Native on this podcast. So, Ola, can you tell us some more about your book? What is it called?
Yes. So it's funny to hear that I just wrote a book because it was such a long process that it took a year. But yeah, I did manage to finish it. And the title is Simplifying State Management in React Native. And there's like a subtitle that's very, very long. And
the subtitle is Master State Management from Hooks and Context through
Redux, MobX, XState, Jotai, and React Query.
Yeah. So I guess you are describing a lot of different libraries there.
Exactly. The goal of the book is to show the whole landscape of different state management libraries that are there for us to use.
Funny. This is the same thing that I wanted you to explain to us today. So that turned out great. So maybe firstly, let's talk about the native state management in React Native, the default one. Why do we even need state in React Native?
Yes, so I would guess most of us React Native devs, where we are JavaScript developers, basically, right? So JavaScript, we think about web development, websites, and a lot of us started actually with React.js and then moved on to React Native. In any case, this is still JavaScript. So when first websites were created, they were mostly created on the back end, and the back end would serve stuff to the front end, and front end developers would just show like a bunch of squares that we would always have to center, and we never knew how to. What developed was that the front end solutions are more and more complex, and Angular was born and React was born. So we're doing more and more stuff on the front end, and we're not relying on the back end anymore. We just get the data from the back end and we do all the magic on the front end.
Also, we are not displaying the static sites anymore. We are creating web apps.
Web apps, exactly. So what the front end developers realized is that when you have this web app, it's difficult to manage all of the little things that change across your app. You may have like a side menu or settings that are, used across the entire app, and you have to like drill down to find them. So the developers knew there has to be like a better way to manage this, and that's when we got our first state management library that's external to React, and it's Redux. And we'll talk about that more later, of course. But that was like the first moment that we had like a better solution to manage the state of all sorts of different things, of models, themes, whatever the user has in the web app. And all of that kind of works the same in React Native apps, since it's also JavaScript.
So in just regular React, we have the set state, the use state hook now, and set state previously in classes. So I guess that's the default one. What are the limitations of the default state management in React?
Well, the default state management is the biggest problem is that you have to you set your state in your parent component, and let's say like the extreme example is that your parent component, the thing that you want to set in your state is a theme for your app. So you have to set it at the very top in like your parent component, right? And then you go through tens, maybe even hundreds of components to get down to like some button that you have somewhere in some screen that has to be either blue or red or whatever, depending on the theme. So you have to pass this prop and never ever make a typo and never ever forget it. And then what if you want to change it through a button? Then you also have to pass the function that changes the state. So it's it's a lot of shenanigans.
Okay, yeah. So we needed a better solution. And you said the first one was Redux?
The first one was Redux. So to anyone who's sort of familiar with the history of React, first we had XState, only XState, and we mostly use class components. And then Redux was created. And only after Redux was created, hooks were introduced. So a lot of people kind of turned away from Redux and started using hooks. Because useState and useEffect are more comfortable to use with functional components than the old setState with class components.
Yeah, I wonder when in this timeline that you just set up for us, when the context was introduced, because context actually answers the question about theming, right? You can have a context at the top of your app and context provider at the top of your app and context, what is it called?
A consumer, I think.
Consumer, when you want to consume this theme variable, right? So, Redux actually uses context under the hood to work its magic, let's say.
Yeah, so context was introduced, like context for us regular developers was introduced after hooks, or like along with hooks maybe, or like just after hooks. It still feels like a sort of a new solution that people are getting used to. It's like at first everybody was in love with it, just like useEffect, and everybody would just put useEffects everywhere in their apps, and then they put context everywhere in their apps. And I saw this funny tweet that if your app with your context providers, if it looks like a bunch of geese flying east, with the whole context, that you have a problem. This is not cool. So context is an interesting solution, but it's not a solution for everything.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I want to talk about your book now, and let's structure this podcast as you structured your book. So I want to maybe start discussing the philosophies of state management. There are hundreds probably of different libraries, but we can gather
and even
them.
Hundreds more since the book got published.
Yes, we have a new one every day.
Seriously.
So we can probably group them in some categories, in some groups. So what are the categories and how we can categorize the state management solutions?
A way to categorize them that I like a lot is by three fancy words: flux, proxy, and atom. So the flux philosophy is what Redux uses. So the philosophy, we're not talking about code. We're talking high level, just ideologies. So flux is something that was invented at Facebook. It's a way to program that's unidirectional. And it's a unidirectional data flow. And it's very important to not for it to be immutable. Like the state has to be immutable. That's like an important part of it. The second type of state managed libraries is proxy. So a proxy, what it means is that it kind of the state management library kind of automatically wraps your components, and MobX is one of is a library like that. And then we have Atom State, which is the example of that is Jotai, which uses atoms that are very similar to useState hooks. It's just like very tiny pieces of state. So this is like high level philosophy stuff. And now people
I think
also, yeah,
if I can interject here, I
sure.
think most of the articles, most of the podcasts that I've heard, watched on YouTube, actually deal with this flux versus proxy, Redux versus MobX kind of division, and those are the two main players, let's say, on the state management scene. The Atom
Yes.
is quite a new concept, right?
Yeah, Atom is new since because it's like a year old, maybe like a year and a half. And there's also XState, which kind of escapes all categorization. And then we also have React Query, which invites us to sort of think about state management in a completely different way, to consider server state away from app state. And that's like a whole other game. But we should think about it, and we should consider it when we create apps.
Yeah, definitely. So, having that categories in mind,
Yes.
what was the research process of your book? How did you approach the specific libraries? What kind of data were you looking for to describe them?
Yes. So what I like to do is I like to work on real life organisms. I don't like to just stay in the theoretical field. So I decided that I created a simple app. It was at first tempting to do app, since that was like all the React tutorials were doing to do apps. But for React Native, that's a little too small. So it's not enough to do anything really. I needed something where I would have navigation and different screens, and I would have to share data between screens, right? So I decided to create a small clone of a social media app. So I have this little app that I found like some free designs on Dribble that I was able to use. And you just have like your feed screen, your liked images screen, and like your conversations, something like that. So I set up that app using just React at first, just React. So hooks and context. And facing all of the issues that are there with using just hooks and context.
Yeah. So the app is the feed, the wall that I have some photos on that I can like, that I can heart them.
And they have like a few tabs. You have your liked images tab and like your settings tab and conversations.
And if I like a post, a picture or something, it appears in my like tab.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly the challenge, to have the feed of somebody else's images. You open the image in the model, you like it, and then it should appear in your liked images screen, which is in no way connected one to the other. So that's why we need a state management library to kind of manage all of that for us.
Can you maybe say some more about the state connections there? So if I like this picture, it should appear on the second tab, but it also should have some indicator probably on the feed tab. Is there something else? Is there some other connections that we should know about?
No, that's it. I mean, on the feed tab, you open a model, and in the model you click, you press a heart that indicates that the image is liked or is not liked. Okay. Or when you open the model, if the heart is filled up, you know that the image has been liked. So the model, I use React Navigation in the app. So I have tabs through React Navigation, and the model is it's a model. It lives inside of the feed tab. So the feed tab doesn't even have a common parent with the liked images tab, as much as just like the root, like it is in React Navigation.
Sure. Thanks for explaining.
Yeah, and so what I'm doing once the app is set up, what I'm changing with every single library, I would take that functionality and rewrite it in the given with a given state management library to see how difficult it is, how much work it is, and how different it is to think using that library. Because spoiler alert, the biggest difference is that every state management library forces you to think in a different way about your state. That's like the
Okay.
biggest difference.
I really appreciate that this is a very controlled environment, that you have your control group, which is set state and context, and you have this all of these different libraries, but it's all set up in one repository. And the underlying root structure, navigation structure is the same for all of them?
Yes,
Yeah,
it's the same app. Like, so I have the basic app, and then for every state management library, I took the app with just hooks and context, and I replaced hooks and context with the given state management library.
Okay. So what else? What is the next step of your process after creating the app and plugging in the state library management?
Well, doing a lot of research was my next step, usually just the reading documentation. And I was also reaching out to the creators of those state management libraries. I was very lucky that most of them replied to a bunch of questions I had about their libraries. But I hope we can go one by one, and then I'll go more into detail.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to do that. So shall we start?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with I would say it's the oldest, it's the most hated, but it is also the bulletproof, the corporate chosen one. Can you guess what it is?
Yeah, it's Redux.
Yeah.
People love to hate Redux. Yeah. So Redux was created by Dan Abramov at Facebook. And as I said a few moments before, it's based on this flux philosophy of unidirectional data flow. And I highly recommend watching the Egghead course by Dan Abramov on Redux, because what he does is he sort of he implements Redux from scratch, which is just very informative to watch. And it's a free course, so everybody go ahead and do that.
Let's link it in the show notes.
Sure. So what happened with Redux is that it's people love to hate it because it's pretty old, and it didn't, in my personal opinion, it didn't age very well. Because when you set up Redux, you have to have a huge boilerplate. And when you have a big app, it feels that every time you need to change anything in your app, you have to change 1,000 different things. So what happened is that there was another library created it's called Redux Toolkit. Okay, so Redux Toolkit was created to help.
It's a utility, on top of Redux.
Yes, exactly. So this utility makes working with Redux much easier, and I recommend it. And it's maintained by Mark Erickson. On Twitter, his handle is acemark, and I spoke with him a little bit about why he works with Redux Toolkit. He told me that he just liked using it, and then he would answer a bunch of questions, and then he became very active in the community, and now he's the main maintainer of Redux Toolkit. And what's super impressive with Mark Erickson is that he's in a bunch of different places answering questions about Redux Toolkit. He's on Stack Overflow, he's on Discord, he's on Twitter, and he's very open to answering all sorts of questions. So that's the creators. Now, going back to the library itself, when you start with pure Redux and you listen to that Egghead course by Dan Abramov, he talks a lot about how state is immutable and that you should never mutate state, right? And if you use pure Redux and you write your reducer, so as far as nomenclature goes, you have reducers, you have actions, you have the store. The store is like the state of your app, and it's this entity that lives kind of outside of your app, and all sorts of magic happens there. And then if you want to change something in that state, in that store, you have to use an action, you have to dispatch an action, and then there's reducers, and all sorts of magic.
The state is like a global thing. It's only one state, even though there are some abstractions on top of it that you can treat some parts as separate parts. the state is one. There's one
Yes.
state in Redux.
Yes.
And if you want to change it, you dispatch an action. The reducer listens, I guess, for that action, and then what?
And then the state is changed, and it's accessible to your entire app. The new state is accessible to your entire app. But I wanted to touch a little bit upon that immutable stuff, because, as I said, if you use pure Redux, you cannot mutate state, because the world will blow up if you mutate state in your reducer, pretty much. So if you use Redux Toolkit uses a library called immer that kind of under the hood. So even if you, as the end user, you may think that you're mutating state, but Redux Toolkit uses immer as a middleman. So you think that you're mutating state, but then immer does its job to make sure the state is not mutated, and then goes to the implementation of Redux under the hood, and the state stays immutable. So that's interesting about the whole immutable thing, because sometimes it's hidden from us, the developers who use the libraries.
Yeah. I remember when I used I guess the two different approaches is that in the olden days you had to spread your array into a new array, and right now you can just push to existing array, and immer will just create a new array under the hood.
Exactly. Yeah. So the question is, does it maybe like immer is helping us, but it's also maybe creating bad what's the word? Like we are getting used to doing bad things, sort of. If somebody works only with Redux Toolkit, they think they can just mutate state, because that's what they think.
Well, but the Redux Toolkit is the de facto way of using Redux now.
Yeah.
It's the now I forgot the word.
It's the go-to.
It's the go-to way. It's the recommended way of using Redux.
Exactly.
So I guess that's fine, as long as you know that the state is actually not mutated. It is immutable. Yeah.
That's a bunch of very smart words we just said there.
Like I feel like we could have a whole episode about Redux, and it could have been 3 hours long, and everyone would understand half of it, even if we would use smart words, because Redux is so huge in JavaScript, in React world. Like I feel like every big app that wasn't written last year that I worked on uses Redux, right?
Yes, totally. Redux is synonymous with React pretty much right now. If you look at job opportunities, like job offers, there's if they want React, they want Redux as well. Like 90% of the time. And it is like battle tested, and but the sad thing is that we are so used to it being that it's battle tested and it works really great, that people are afraid to look outside of Redux and try to find something else. So like that's a fun fact that Łukasz and I, we work currently together on a very big app that uses Redux, and it's mostly, so we have Redux Toolkit as dependency, but we don't take advantage of it enough in the app. And so most of the app is just pure Redux, and it's making us sad sometimes. Like we try to do slices and stuff like that, but it's we have long ways to go for it to be comfortable to use, I think.
Actually, I am happy to work on this project because you are in it and you are an expert in state management. So
yes, the project. I am very happy to work on that project as well, but I would be happier if we had more Redux Toolkit and less Redux.
So I want to finish this Redux discussion.
Yes.
And you said one thing at the end of there, that Redux is so ubiquitous that people are afraid. Thank you. Are afraid to look outside of Redux to look for something else there. What else is there?
So we're off to the next section, right?
Yes.
We talked about just pure React and context and hooks. We looked at the staple, the Redux library that everybody seems to be using, and now let's venture a little bit outside of the box. The next library that I looked at in my book was MobX. MobX is also like the second oldest after Redux.
Which is still inside the box, to be honest. That's the second most used, probably.
Yes, exactly. MobX was sort of like an answer to the first problems where people said, "Oh, we don't really love Redux," so MobX was created. It was created by Michel Vestrate. Oh my god, I hope I pronounced his name right. So he's also the creator of Immer, and he also has a course on Egghead about MobX, and it's also a very good course, and it's free, and I recommend it.
Another link in the show notes.
Of course. So the thing is, with the biggest difference between Redux and MobX, how MobX wants to differentiate itself is that MobX is a reactive library. It uses reactive programming. So let's start with this whole philosophy again. So in MobX, you have, as I said, it's categorized as a proxy state management library because it kind of wraps your components and it tells them to observe stuff or be observed. And then the changes happen asynchronously and they are observed and stuff is changed. So, it's kind of like this, that's the idea, the high level idea. Behind MobX. In their documentation, they say that they use functional reactive programming. So I tried to understand what that meant. So functional programming, it's the opposite of imperative programming. Reactive programming is the opposite of imperative programming. So I have a good example for that, actually.
Yeah.
So in imperative programming, you can set that variable A equals B plus C, and if you change B and C, A stays later on in the program. A stays the same because B and C were changed later on. So in reactive programming, when you change B and C later on, A will be changed as well because it reacts to the change.
Because it's computed. The MobX, I love MobX. I need to be honest about this. Like, this is my favorite state management library, and I even built some helpers for myself years ago for it to be more stable, let's say. To behave more like Redux in a sense that you cannot do everything everywhere. You have to follow some rules. But I wanted to... what I like about MobX is the computed things, like you said. If I have a computed value that depends on 3 different values, if even one of them changes, my computed value is changed as well, and something observes this value and re-renders. So I don't have to care about setting 5 different state pieces because some action happened. I just changed this action and my state is derived from this small change, which I really like a lot and which saves me a lot of time while developing. But
and they create
afterwards, it can be hard to track
it becomes sort of a web of dependencies. So the creators of MobX in their documentation, they talk a lot about deriving stuff, and they encourage the users to derive everything that is possible to be derived, because that ensures that your app will stay up to date, right? Because all this stuff is derived and you don't have to think about what depends on what. So that's how Redux is different from MobX, and I can tell you how MobX is similar to Redux is that Redux has Redux Toolkit and MobX has MobX State Tree.
Yes.
So as much as MobX is unopinionated and you can use it with any UI library that you want, MobX State Tree is a little bit more opinionated, and it has a lot of helper functions and utilities. And honestly, I love the utilities in MobX State Tree. It's like it's almost as if they thought about everything. You can just find everything you may need to derive all sorts of data and construct your state tree how you want to. And MobX State Tree is maintained by Jamin Holmgren, who is the CTO or CEO of Infinite Red. Oh my God, I can remember now. But anyways,
I think he's the CTO, yeah.
CTO, yeah. So I spoke with him a little.
He talks about MobX State Tree constantly, and also MobX State Tree is a default weight of state management in Ignite, which is a boilerplate for React Native from Infinite Red. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And MobX State Tree was also what I used. I didn't use pure MobX. I used MobX State Tree in my app because after reading a little bit about it, I thought that just using MobX alone would be a little bit more painful than MobX State Tree. And MobX State Tree was a breeze. It was awesome because you set up your state like in your tree with all the actions and all the stuff, and then you tell the component to observe it, and you're done. And it was really nice to use. So I don't blame you for loving it.
I do love MobX, but it's been a while since I used it last time because, like you said, we work on a huge project which uses Redux, so I'm in the Redux territory right now. But I want to ask about the terminology. In the Redux world, you said we have reducers, state, actions. What are the counterparts in the MobX world?
Well, it's difficult to talk counterparts since it's set up very differently in MobX State Tree. So you have your one file. Let's say in Redux, you have to set up all your stuff, your actions separately, your reducers separately, and your store somewhere else. So in MobX State Tree, you create your one file. That would be sort of like a slice in Redux, maybe.
Mm-hmm. A store.
Philosophically, a sort of.
Yeah.
And so you set up your object, and the actions on that object are kind of set up all together in that tree. And I can't remember if there are any specific. Well, there's the observer.
Yeah. So that was what I was aiming at. That you have to wrap your components in observers to listen for the state changes, basically.
Yeah. So that is one word that is specific for.
Which is like a counterpart of connect in Redux or hooks somehow, right?
Yes, totally. That would be the counterpart. Yeah, of connect, I would say so. Yeah, and MobX State Tree uses TypeScript as a first-class citizen. So I started out writing my app in JS because I thought that maybe creating it in TypeScript would add another layer of difficulty to the readers. So I wanted to avoid that, and I would just write everything in JavaScript. And then I got to MobX, and then I was so sad because it's so much better in TypeScript. Everything is typed and is safe, and it feels like you can't break your app because you have to add types. And that was I thought it was too bad that I used JavaScript at that point.
So is MobX branch the only branch in TypeScript in your project?
No, I still use JavaScript. I wanted to, I wanted to keep that control environment. But I did wrote in the book that all the examples for MobX State Tree are in TypeScript, and that I recommend to look into it for all the readers.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think that wraps up our MobX discussion. MobX is the best state library, and you should use it with MobX State Tree. Yes. Let's move on. Right now, I want to look at something really outside the box. And you said that in the very beginning, that some libraries follow flux, some libraries follow proxy, some libraries are atom-based. Yes. And there is one which one is it?
Then there's XState. So XState is a library that was created by David Khorshid. Also, I hope I pronounced his name right. On Twitter, his handle is David K. Piano, and he's also very active on Twitter. And one of the nicest things about XState is that it has a visualizer. So you have this website where it's free to use. You just dump your state machine. We'll get to that in a second. And you see a visualization of all the stuff that can happen in your app. If you do this, what action will happen, how the state will change, and what is the next state. So that's super useful. And I also had a chance to exchange a couple of messages with David, and he said that actually working on the visualizer is the most difficult part, and that's what takes most of his time, not the library itself. So going back to the library itself, it's rooted very strongly in mathematics, and exactly in the concept of state machines. And the concept itself is that anything can be in only one state at any given time. When we go to web development or app development, you have a button and it's either clicked or a checkbox. It's either checked or it's not checked. It's always in one of those two states. So you start out with this sort of mental model that all of this stuff in your app has to be in some sort of state. And you model your state machine on the basis of that. You kind of write, you always have to have your default state. And then you tell your state machine that if this happens, this element should go into this state, So that's all very much based in high-level mathematics. There's in the XState documentation, which is very well written, there's a bunch of links to articles about all those mathematical concepts.
Well, it has to be well written because the concept itself, it's so outside of your normal world, normal thinking about programming. I remember some of it from university.
Did you like it?
The concept in abstract seems simple, but when I look at our application and the whole array of states that should be in different states, right, and how they interact with each other, I cannot wrap my head around connecting this to anything else that Redux. This is a completely different mental model, and
it is.
Yeah. How did it go, including this into your small, let's say, scale application?
The scale is very small. So XState this is just a personal preference. I love this state management library. That's actually my favorite. And whenever I use it, I feel like if I start out with just a bare bones React app and then I add XState, I just can remove all of the use effects and all of the crap because XState manages all of it. And so that's it's very succinct. You have all your states in one place, and you have your machine, and then you pass it through context and you use it in your app, and it's very logically linked. In the state machine, you have everything linked in the state machine. The XState also makes it very easy to use promises because promises are state machines. When you think about it, the mental model, right? You go in, you have your loading, then you have either success or failure. So they fit in like a puzzle piece into your state machine. You can do all your fetching, and it doesn't feel like with Redux fetching feels and saving data feels
like a workaround.
Like a little bit unnatural. With XState, you feel right at home. It's fine. You have your promise. You have your data. It's loaded. It's not loaded. It changes. It's very comfortable to use. As far as complex applications are concerned, there's this concept of state explosion, and it's also a very there's a very nice article in the XState documentation that we can also link in this podcast, because you start out thinking about this this mental model, this state that you have a checkbox and it's so easy and simple, but then you have 5 checkboxes and maybe an input field, and the input field depends on checkboxes and maybe on the text that you put in, and it can be valid or invalid, and it's sort of kind of it
blows up. That's what I said before, that one checkbox is easy enough, but then everything depends on each other and it becomes a mess. Can you please?
And it's called a state explosion, and there are utilities in XState that help you get your head wrapped around that and get your code working and being readable, which is the most important part.
I was going to ask you about something, but first let me ask you about something else, and then please remind me to ask you a proper question.
Okay.
But the less proper question is, this is a quite new library as well, right? This is also around 2 years old.
Yeah, 2 or 3, can remember now. Yeah, it's pretty new.
Okay, so the proper question is, can you please dump down the use of this library for me? What is the connections to React? Where do different pieces of XState live? What do I have in my component? How do I change the state? Stuff like that.
All of the state changes happen in your state machine. So you write your state machine. It's just one file where you set up all the states that your piece of state can be in. If it can be checked, unchecked, valid, invalid, whatever. You write your state machine, you export it, and then as far as React is concerned, you pass it through context, and then you use it across your app. And XState makes sure your app doesn't re-render 1,000 times. And unnecessarily.
In my React component, I have access to this one checkbox, and I have access to some function that changes this checkbox. What is the function?
Well, in your component, you add your use machine hook, because hooks are fancy and everybody uses hooks. So you can have access to anything you want to export from this from the state machine, because maybe you can ideally you would have all of your inner workings and state changes in the state machine and not in the component, right? So ideally, but then sometimes you need to pass a function that if you click this button, this should change. So yeah, this is all exported from the machine, and we use it through hooks.
Sure. Okay. I will definitely look into the documentation of this. Like I said, it feels just weird, but I take that you love it, and from your recommendation, I'm going to try it as well in my next weather app project or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's
small scale.
Yeah, it's a very super personal opinion. It's I cannot tell you why I like React and other people like Angular. It's just there are mental models that what?
Who does like Angular? Who likes Angular?
People used to like Angular.
Moving on from my bad joke about Angular, we were talking about XState now, and let's move on to the last on our philosophies list, the Atom philosophy, and the representative from Atom philosophy is
Jotai.
Please,
Jotai.
Take it away.
Yes, so Jotai is the baby of the bunch, is the youngest library, but it was actually created because there's another library created by Facebook called Recoil. But Recoil is, they have a GitHub repository, but it's marked very clearly that it's an experimental library. And it's been an experimental library for a year and a half. And the creators of Jotai were tired of waiting for Recoil, and they created their own implementation. And they called it Jotai, which means something in Japanese probably, because the creator of Jotai, Daishi Kato, he is Japanese. He's part of.
I'm gonna translate it in the background.
Or something. Yeah.
And please talk.
Sure. Daishikato is part of this group called Poimandres. It's a group of people who love all sorts of React stuff, and they work for free on making all the React world better, pretty much. They have a Discord group which is open and anybody can join. They also have a Twitter account. And they also created a bunch of other state management libraries. They created Zustand, which is like a modern Redux implementation. They created Valtio, which is a modern MobX implementation. And they created Jotai, which is this ADAM implementation. The mental model behind Jotai is that we don't have this blob of state, but we have very atomic, small pieces of state that are not necessarily linked together. So I tried out this library in my small app, and I cannot vouch for how it would work in a bigger app. I have no idea. In a small app, it worked very nicely. Like, it sort of felt like magic. And you just use hooks and context pretty much, but the specialized hooks that use ADAM. They have async ADAMs for fetching. The documentation is very short. Like, it will take you a half hour to read the entire documentation. And the library is very open to adding different things to it that you can use. It cooperates very well with other libraries that you may have in your app. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And I also spoke with Daishikato a little bit on Twitter. He's also very active on Discord in the Poimandres group and on Twitter. And he just started giving out talks like this. The last year, I think, was the first time he appeared in person at a conference to talk about Jotai. So
okay.
That's nice.
I checked, and Jotai means state.
There you go. I bet Zustand and Valtio also mean state in some language.
Yeah. Zustand I also heard about. What would you say is the biggest selling point of Jotai over more battle-tested libraries?
The biggest selling point is for people to stop going automatically to Redux. Because if you're writing an app that is not huge, but 90% of apps that we use are not huge. Let's be honest. It's like a couple of screens, and it doesn't need a robust state management library that needs a huge boilerplate. So the biggest selling point is to think twice, and maybe all you need are just a couple of ADAMs. Yeah. And that will be enough for your global state.
And also, like, this is a different paradigm from the XState is other league, but the paradigm is different. So I guess it's nice to check few options during your career, right? And figure out what you like best, and maybe pick and choose. Maybe you can mix them together, and maybe you can think of something yourself in your day-to-day development. Has nothing to do with state management, but maybe you can introduce some of other philosophies in your code architecture.
Exactly.
Okay. We were talking about state, which is Jotai in Japanese. And now let's move on to React Query, which is, I think, the last one in your book.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. Yes, exactly. Because that's the outlier. It's not the youngest library, but it's the outlier because it invites the developer to think even more outside the box, right? Because we were just talking about how to manage state in your app. So this means every app, virtually every app, fetches some data and then has to do something with that data on the screen to display it to the user. So what React Query did when they came on the scene is that they said, hey, maybe this is server state, and maybe you shouldn't play around with it in your app, in the state of your app, but just respect that this is server state. And all you have to do is make sure that it's fresh. Yes. And that's it. So if if your user changes the theme of the app, and the theme that they are using is preserved on the server, because every time the user logs in, they request the stuff from the server, and the server says, oh, hi, your name is this, and you like to use the dark theme. We don't have to keep that in the state of the app. We can just use the server state and just make sure it's fresh. So that's the philosophy behind React Query, which is actually rebranded. It's TanStack Query right now, because it was at first created to cater to React, but then they expanded. It was created by Tanner Lindsley, and he has a bunch of other libraries, and he decided to rebrand so that people know that TanStack Query can be used with different libraries, different UI libraries. And the best resource for learning about TanStack Query is a blog by TK Dodo. That's his handle on the blog and on Twitter. His real name is Dominique. I'm not even sure about his last name, but so he has a blog about TanStack Query, and this is the best resource to learn about this library.
Okay. One thing that I want to comment on from your description of TanStack Query, React Query previously. React Query is the much better name.
Right? I can't get used to TanStack Query either.
Yeah.
Give us time.
So just so I understand, and so our listeners, viewers understand, previously in React and MobX and every other state management library, what you have is your asynchronous action to your server. Server gives you some data, and then you push it to your store. You just save it to your store. And React Query is actually a caching mechanism that just ask your server for some data, and like it lives in your application, but somehow not.
Somehow not. Exactly. So you described it very well. You described very well the biggest difference, that with those state management libraries, we fetch and we keep the state in the server state. We put it in the app state, and we try to make sure that it's synced, that it's the same. Maybe rerun some fetches to the server from time to time, or not. And with React Query, you fetch the data, and it lives in a cache layer, which is accessible through hooks. Again, you set up your context, your query context at the root of your app, and then across your app you use a hook. And I remember, Łukasz, we spoke about adding React Query to the project we are working on. And I remember that we had this conversation where we were in a group, and people were asking, okay, but how do you get React Query data into Redux? Because that's the first thought. That's like the first, that's right? But you don't, exactly. This lives completely separately. It's just a layer. It's a caching layer, pretty much. And you don't, you can, it's like you have, like, for example, you have like functions to mutate data, but the data mutation functions are actually post functions to the server, right? You post data to the server, and that's the mutate function pretty much. But then there's a whole bunch of magic that happens so that before the server responds, you can display some stuff. So caching is the basic building block of React Query, and then there's a whole bunch of magic with preloading, optimistic updates, infinite queries. It's a very well developed library that answers real problems in real apps.
Yeah. I like it a lot. I have not used it, but you introduced it to me, and since then I really get a feel of how it can improve my life as a developer and my applications. And that was React Query.
Yes.
React Query is the last state management in your application. In your book.
In my book. Yes.
In your fabulous book.
Yes.
What are the other honorable mentions that you want to briefly maybe talk about what other state libraries are there that you maybe didn't have time to include in the book?
Yes. So as I mentioned, there are a couple of libraries created by the Poimandres group. There's Zustand and Valtio. And since I finished writing my book, there's also Legend State, and I feel like we joked at the beginning that there is a new state library every day, but I love that. I mean, if you think about it, a few years ago, it was just Redux and maybe MobX. Like Redux was like the go-to, and and if you were feeling funky, you would use MobX.
Yeah.
But since then,
for hipsters.
For hipsters, exactly. But since then, we have this plethora of solutions, and that is great because every app is different and every team is different, and all these libraries solve pretty much the same problem, but in very different ways. So I'm happy to see that developers can read the documentation and decide that, okay, I like this, I don't like that, and this speaks to me better. And I even arguments like the documentation, if you like how the documentation is structured, you will go back to the documentation, you will use your library in the best possible way, right? If you hate the docs, then you're not going to be able, you're just going to fight your app all day long, and that's too bad.
Yeah, and the same goes with the community. If the library has a huge community, like you said, guy from Redux Toolkit, he answers questions on like few different platforms about this. And what I've heard is that's how he got involved in the like main Redux team, because he was so active in Redux Toolkit. So yeah. Maybe I can do a little sales pitch here to all of our clients. Maybe if you have a state solution that you don't like, or maybe is not performant enough, reach out. We have Ola, who is a world-class expert, author of a book about state management. We have other very, very proficient developers in migrating from one state library to the other, introducing React query, stuff like that. Reach out. Ola, thank you so much. We were discussing a lot of different state libraries. Let's talk about your book for a minute. So if you could give me an advice, how would I, a guy who didn't write a book in his life, how did you approach writing your book? What was your process?
So I was very lucky to be approached by the publisher Pact, and I was very humbled by it. Before they approached me, I did a couple of talks at conferences, so I guess that's how I got discovered, you may say. And then I got approached by this publisher, and we had a couple of meetings online about what I could write about, how much time it may take, and stuff like that. And then throughout writing the book, they were very nice in poking me and saying, hey, we need that next chapter like yesterday, so get working. And they were always super nice, and I was always late, so I'm very thankful to them. I had to do a lot of research that everybody can do, but it does take a lot of time. I have this quote that's actually also on my Twitter background, that opportunity is often missed by people because it's dressed in overalls. So this means that you get a lot of opportunities in life, but once you get the opportunity, you have to work hard to get something out of it. And I feel that writing this book was totally like that. The opportunity was just like the beginning, and then there's a lot of hard work that goes into that.
And how long it took you to do it?
It took me a year to starting. Well, maybe 11 months. Yeah.
Yeah, when you first told me about it, it was February last year.
But in February, so I started writing in February, but I started talking with Pact in November before that. So
okay. Can you tell us again what is the book called and where people can find it? Where I can find it?
Yes. So the book is called Simplifying State Management in React Native. And the very long subtitle is Master State Management from Hooks and Context through Redux, MobX, XState, Jotai, and React Query. You can find it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You can buy it for Kindle, or starting January 13th, 2023, you will be able to buy the paperback version. And I have a personal question for you, Łukasz, since you're also a great expert. I want to ask you if you would be willing to write an opinion on the book, and you will receive a free book if you agree. So please agree.
I will do anything for a free book of yours, but only if it's signed. I will definitely read the book, and I will definitely write an opinion about it. Also, complementary to the book is the repository that we talked about throughout this episode of our podcast. Is it on your GitHub? Where is it?
It's on the publisher's GitHub, but I think it's public, so we're gonna put a link in the description. And yeah, and my long-term dream is to build out a website like Component Party. I don't know if you know that website, componentparty.dev. That's a website where you can check different UI libraries. You put in what you want to use, like I don't know, button or whatever, and you can check how that would be implemented in Svelte, in Vue, in React. So like my long-term dream is to build a website like that for state management libraries.
Oh, okay. It's nice.
And hopefully I'll be working on that in the next few months.
Over the next year.
Yeah.
Okay. Ola, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much. You are a great colleague of mine. I learn a lot from you every day on the project that we work on together. And I'm so glad that you came onto this podcast and we could talk about state management. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much. I learn from you every day as well. And I'm very humbled to be here and very thankful. And thank you.
Thank you. To all of our listeners, thank you for listening and for watching, and to see you in the next episode of the React Native Show podcast. Thank you.